From the Blue Room in downtown Vienna, welcome to another installment of our live streams. My name is Mike Boyle, and I have a special guest today, Tony Amante Scheppers.
Hi, Mike.
Oh, and I was going to say, with your background, the Vasco da Gama, no, I was kidding. Coming from Washington, D.C., he is a customer experience expert. And the subject today is to talk about this intersection between customer experience and sustainability. So, Tony, thank you very much for joining today. I think it might be good to go ahead and get us started with a general definition of what customer experience is all about, because I've noticed a lot of people think that they know what it's about, but then when you start talking to them, you realize they don't have a clue. So go ahead, Tony. I give you the stage.
Well, thanks for having me, and nice to speak with you across the pond, as they say, on the Saturday afternoon. Customer experience. I mean, it's a term that is coming more in vogue as people are talking about having experiences versus just a transaction. So if you're purchasing something or having a talk with someone, you're wanting to talk about the entire journey from looking at what to purchase to actually making that purchase, and then post-purchase going forward and maintaining that loyal customer connection. So in terms of definitions, it's the overall feeling the customer has of their experience with a business or a brand. It's kind of like engaging somebody during a journey and all those touch points that add up to the overall sentiment the person has after they made that purchase and beyond.
Okay, I think you have an example for us, if I'm not mistaken. Let me go ahead and
Sure.
bring that to the foray. So
Sure.
Let me give you the possibility.
The example that you've come up with, if you can see that screen, and you're welcome to make that screen bigger, Mike, instead of my face, that's okay too, is the Eurorail purchase. So if you've ever been to Europe, or if you ever thought of going on the Eurorail, there's so many touch points along that journey, both the one you're actually taking on the train as well as the purchasing one. So you can find the Eurorail through the computer, getting tickets that way, through phone, through chatbot, through chatting with somebody in so many ways, through email, etc. So it's really a lot of touch points along the way. But it's not just that. It's making that booking and going from the booking to the actual pre-travel, all those touch points. You're researching and finding ways to enjoy that Eurorail ride. And post Eurorail, the Eurorail company is looking for ways to engage you yet again. Are you going to be a loyal customer or not? Are you going to talk about your journey? Are you going to post, Instagram photos about it? So all of these touch points lead up to the actual customer experience. And this is just one example of many out there.
Okay. That all sounds well and good. Of course, the subject that I like talking about is the sustainability, and especially concentrating on the customer experience and making sure that customer's experience is sustainable, because from my personal perspective, that seems to be one of the most difficult things for us to go ahead and achieve. I'll give you an example. I'll go ahead and be very cognizant of the food that I buy at the market to make sure that where it's actually coming from,
Sure.
that we make sure that nothing's thrown away. And I try to go ahead and frequent establishments that concentrate on these things all the time. And I don't know about you, and all of you who are out there, very often I feel like I'm being made a fool, because I'll go behind the store and watch how they'll go ahead and throw away, for me, in my opinion, very good food, and they'll throw it in the dumpster. And so I feel that that the whole experience has been ruined. Now, the person who was throwing that in the dumpster didn't mean to go ahead and ruin my experience, but nevertheless, it was done. And so I think the real question I would have for you, and by the way, for all of you listeners or watchers out there, I do not want this to be just me asking Tony questions, but I'd be very, very keen, if you have any questions for Tony or perhaps for me, that you go ahead and utilize the chat box, because I think that would make it a much more interesting experience, because believe you me, you don't want to hear me talk for an hour. So in any case, getting back to the point, Tony, maybe if you can kind of allude to some examples that you've run across of where you feel that the companies have actually gotten it right in putting together that, what I call the circular experience, putting together a customer experience that's completely sustainable, where the they're able to go ahead and use that sustainability as a way to foster loyalty to their brand.
Sure. And before I do that, I just got word that perhaps it's not streaming on a couple of the networks that you had set up. So maybe double check that if you don't mind. Someone just said it wasn't live on their end. But yeah, so some examples. A couple come to mind when you want to talk about customer experience and the circular economy. And with the circular economy, as you said, it's just about always finding ways to reuse, perhaps recycle. But in my opinion, it's about being transparent. If you as a company are telling employees to, for example, be more customer centric than anyone else, then shout that from the rooftop. An example comes to mind of Zappos, which has been shared a few times throughout the years. Tony Haish is the founder of it, and he said to his persons, manning the phones when somebody called about their shoes and they had questions, try and have the longest conversation with somebody that you've ever had before to make sure that they fully trust Zappos. So he said, I'll give a bonus or a prize to the employee at Zappos on the phone with a customer who was able to speak the longest with them. I think the record was like 8.5 or 9 hours, where they talked shoes and they talked travel. So not only is Zappos talking to their employees about being most customer-centric business, but they're actually acting it out as well, and that's seen. An example, if you want to flip to a slide here.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Is Patagonia. So I don't know if anyone listening has a Patagonia apparel or if they've ever gone on any of their travels, but when it comes to their clothing, they promise that they will fix it, repair it during the entire lifetime of that shirt or boot or sock or pant. And they went so far as to say, send your ill-repaired or torn and tattered shirt and we'll fix it up and we'll send it back to you. No questions asked and free of charge. So in 2016, I think it was 2017, Patagonia started this program called Worn Wear, where they had this tour bus, this sort of VW tour bus traveling the United States, and they would go and set up shop in different parts of cities, and you bring your Patagonia abused and worn clothing, and they'll fix it right there on the spot. Now, obviously, you could send it in, and they could do it in the shops. But to have this tour bus, and they had a following, I think it was something 40, 50, 60,000 Instagram photos thereafter. People were just enamored with it. And Patagonia claims that the Reno, Nevada-based repair shop is the largest garment factory in the United States, doing about 30 to 40,000 repairs a year. So that's a company that has a loyal following because they walk the walk and they speak it too.
That's interesting, and I think that it's all well and good that you have one company in one sector who's able to go ahead and perform such magical feats. Mm-hmm. But the real question is it not only sustainable from an ecological perspective, but is it sustainable from a business perspective?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of customer experience ROIs, return of investments, that are metrics that are out there that companies follow. And part of making sure your customer experience is solid is following the correct metrics. So you can look at, for example, the Zappos of how long somebody's on the phone. Is that actually a good thing to be doing or not? You could be looking at how many touch points the customer has before they make a purchase. Should there be many touch points? If you're buying a house, so I bought a condo with my fiance about a year and a half ago. We went through so many conversations with our real estate agent to the point where she probably wished she never partnered with us. But those numerous touch points we had with her solidified the deal that A, we chose the best real estate agent out there, and B, we chose the best condo out there because of all those touch points. It's about making sure that you're available. It's about having that journey be as smooth and seamless as possible, but also having that loyal following. When it comes to businesses staying profitable and sustainable, it's not so much making a dollar today as it is having that loyal following, because it's so expensive to secure that customer and a new one after that. But once you have that one customer for life, the cost of retaining that customer is much less than trying to find a new one again and again.
Okay, let me go back to my example, the one of the food where I went in back of the supermarket and saw that the employee was going ahead and throwing food away that I thought was definitely not worth throwing away. And first, the last thing we ever want to do is throw anything away.
Right.
Now, this individual did not do anything wrong from his perspective, but the idea would, you have different parts of the journey, the customer journey, where things can go wrong. And I think the real question is going to be, so how do companies go ahead and overcome that probability, or the possibility, better said, that one of the customer touch points goes fooey, and that means that the entire experience is ruined for that person who is willing to pay money to make sure that the experience is sustainable.
So you're asking if you value as a customer the reuse and recycle of a product and less waste, how do you show that? Is that what the question is?
No, because within a supply chain, there are so many different spots where it can go wrong. The question is, how do you go ahead and manage that from a company perspective to make sure that the entire experience for that customer is meeting that standard that the customer has? Because even you could look at within a certain company, you will go from department to department. Some might be a little bit more in tune to the customer needs. Some might consider it to be a burden. And they might not be on the same page when it comes to this whole idea of sustainability. In other words, if the company has gone ahead and put that as a mission, and the example you're giving with Patagonia is a very clear one, because they are known, their whole vision was based upon this. So that was easy. But in my mind, they're clearly in the minority. So furthermore, there's certain parts of this journey that very often we cannot manage as a business. So the question is, how do you go ahead and ensure that if you're running a company, that all the points of the experience, all these touch points are matching the experience for the customer?
It begins with the employees. So if you have a business that has the mantra of no waste or limited waste, and let's be as transparent as possible as to the supply chain, for example, of how we get our products, the employees need to be, trained, almost, positively indoctrinated, drinking that Kool-Aid, if you will, to believe that what the higher ups are saying is true. So if you have staff, let's say at a hotel, that claim to be extremely customer centric, they'll do anything and everything, they'll go out of their way to understand who's signing in and checking in, to know your name when you walk through that door. Those people at the front desk, they darn well better want to know your name when you walk through that door, want to know your favorite color in chocolates. Because if they don't truly have that interest, if the higher ups at the hotel are not saying to the employees and the staff at that front door, truly believe and want to know your customers, your guests, they won't. So in my opinion, it's empowering, it's giving trust to the employees to say, I'm going to solve a problem that comes up, and I have the bandwidth and power to do so, and to truly want to as well. So I think it does come down to decision makers, higher up stakeholders telling the employees, have decision-making power, but truly believe that what we're doing and saying is what you believe in as well.
Okay, let me go ahead and dissect some of those things you said. But
Sure.
Before I go ahead and do that, I want to make sure that we are very cognizant that there are some people who are watching. And I want to ensure that this does not say is a conversation between Tony and myself. I welcome commentary from all of you with regards to what we're talking about. I'm hoping that we're talking about something that's meaningful for you. And I welcome the opportunity for you to go ahead and add some comments here in the chat box. But first of all, I promised you I was going to do some dissection here, Tony, so let me go at it. You talked about empowerment. So that means you have to have enough trust in the employee. You mentioned the word transparency earlier as well. And I think that that's another point that comes through, not only with the way that the the employers act towards the employee. But there's another part of the equation that I think comes into play, and that is the whole idea, why are we here? And if that sustainability part is not included in the message, then I truly question whether you're going to have the employees rather down at it doesn't matter where they are within the company actually going ahead and fulfilling that. Because if you take those three components, the empowerment, the transparency to make sure that the employees actually believe it. When you mentioned drinking the Kool-Aid, that means that they are on board. That's very, very important. And then, of course, the whole idea is whether that message is part of the culture of the company. So how do you go ahead, especially with this concept of sustainability, and here I'm being very critical, but very often it's linked within CSR, and people say that's just a cost center that we check off our list. So how do we overcome that?
Overcoming it really comes down to finding ways to make all departments believe what they're doing is right. So I was an external consultant at a $43 billion international hotel chain based in DC. And for a year, I was tasked with, as a management consultant, breaking down silos. It was fascinating. Dozens of departments finding ways to do their own thing without communicating. So I was brought in to break down those silos, find ways to, show that there are metrics that all of these departments are following, and they're different by a little bit, but in the end, the goal is still the same. How do you get more loyal guests to book again at that hotel chain? How do you get them to spend more money for food and beverage, F&B, at the restaurants on site? And so what I had to do in this particular example was look at the metrics. For example, the connectivity team was following. The connectivity team is basically the department that communicates with the online travel agencies to make sure that the rates are correct on Kayak and Booking.com and Google. And look at the departments of digital. So they're the ones that are making sure the mobile app is reading the same thing as the website, and that the telephone call centers are saying the same thing as those two platforms. So they're all looking at slightly different metrics. What I had to do was find where they're grabbing all of these metrics and put them up on a digital dashboard and say, listen, you guys you're wanting to tell the exact same story. You're following slightly different metrics. Let's hone all these in and show that you're following the metrics you're wanting to follow are nearly identical, and the goal is the same. So breaking down those silos and making sure that these departments were communicating together and effectively, I think was very key there. And I think if you can apply that to any company, any organization, even a nonprofit, even a hospital or a university, it's key, making sure that these departments are communicating.
That's a very good example of how you're able to go ahead and take those differences and make sure that they're in alignment. And that works well if you have a clear message on the top that's cascaded all the way down. And so I could definitely follow that. But we also know from the travel industry that you run across situations where there are a number of stakeholders that are not your employees that have a critical role in the entire journey. And those are things that you cannot control. So how do you manage that part?
How do you manage the top of the funnel?
The stakeholders that you do not report to you that are critical for that journey, those things that you cannot directly control. How do you manage that?
Gosh, that is tough. I mean, as organizations grow and grow, how do you make sure that everyone's in lockstep? A couple things come to mind. One, what I like about companies that have the CEO give messages, especially during COVID times, across the entire platform is very key. So going back to a hotel example, Arne Sorensen, the CEO of Marriott, he's battling cancer, COVID hits, decimates the entire travel industry. Hotels are also part of that. But he's coming out every week or two with a video and saying, this is what we're doing. Everyone has to wear masks, period. We're going to refund reservations up to 24 hours before check-in because people's plans are changing left and right. So top down, I think, is very important, sharing those messages. When it comes to creating and maintaining a loyal following, give me a reason to be engaged. If I'm unable to travel right now because of COVID, create an experience virtually that keeps me coming back to your website, for example. Show me some awesome photos. Going back to Patagonia, they have great travel experiences. They're probably not offering them right now for obvious reasons, but there's probably great video out there. And why not, put me in virtually there, send me to Africa virtually. Another example in the nonprofit world is our museums here in Washington, D.C. They've been closed for months. What the Smithsonian is doing is you can get a ticket for free and you can sign in during certain days and certain times to get virtual tours. So it's as if I'm looking at the Natural History Museum with a guide sitting next to me on my couch. There's many ways that you can still remain engaged and keep that loyal base by your side.
Okay, thanks for that, Tony. Just for anybody who's perhaps joined us, we are talking about customer experience with a focus on sustainability. I have Tony Amante Shepers with us today. I kind of put him on the hot seat, but I think he'll hold out okay. The idea here is it's not just me and Tony talking, but you have an opportunity to go ahead and join us as well. So please feel free to pose any questions in the chat box, and we would like to go ahead and make this as interactive as possible. And I'm not done with this idea of dealing with all these touch points or all these stakeholders that you cannot directly control, and how do you manage it? I think one of them is always based upon the relationship you have to the supplier. I can give you an example, one that I know of, tied to, as you say in English, IKEA, as we say IKEA here in Europe. Now, they are very keen on truly holding to something sustainable, and there is a fair amount of mistrust simply because they have a reputation of being a company who sells cheap goods. And so there's a direct misconnect between these cheap goods and being sustainable. And so they have a very high mountain to climb. But what they've done is apart from making very clear claims that they would be zero emissions by 2030, I believe. Please don't quote me on this, but that I'm going by memory here. But I know for a fact that it's very important from the standards that they have with everybody they deal with, to ensure that those standards are actually being adhered to. Either that they are going ahead and saying, if you want to do business, this is what we expect from you. Or conversely, the idea of, if you are not able to go ahead and manage it from a horizontal supply chain, then they try to make that experience as vertical as possible. And so I think these are some examples of where this can actually be managed.
Do you think, Mike, IKEA is doing that because they truly believe that that's the route they want to go environmentally, or is it good PR?
That is a very good question. I'd like to believe that they haven't gone as far as they really need to go when we talk about making the system change. And really what we're talking about here is the system change. They have not gone to that level where they are saying they're leaving one part behind and they're continuing with the other. And I think that will be the true test. Because as long as they go ahead and work within a linear economy, in other words, where there is a danger that the customer is just going ahead and throwing away what they consider something that has no value anymore, unless they're able to go ahead and break that. They are not going to, in my book, they're not going to be totally sustainable. They understand that, and in all defense to them, they realize that this is a journey for them. It's a process. It's not something that's achieved from one day to the next. You have to be very cognizant of your customers, getting back to the whole question of customer journey. And I think that it requires some sort of education is not really the word I'm looking for, but you need to build up some sort of awareness, and you need to build incentives into this model. And I think that is the key. In the example you gave with Patagonia, it's quite clear the incentive is that the individuals who buy Patagonia clothes truly identify with this brand, and
Mhm.
because the brand stands for everything sustainable. So that one is relatively easy, but I think you have some other examples you wanted to go ahead and show with us.
Yeah.
Show us. Let me go
Uh,
ahead and pull those up.
sure.
Hold on. I think I could do it this way. Oh, it was easier than I thought. Sometimes it's easy, folks.
Here's a older example, but one that rings true today. So the point is longevity and how this works. So everybody knows Starbucks, whether you like the coffee or not. It's there, and they're going gangbusters and doing quite well. In 2008, the Starbucks sales were down a good 30%. They had 1,000 stores across the U.S. They were shuttering them. Just obviously, it was the Great Recession that was occurring, but Starbucks wasn't wanting to close up shop altogether. So the CEO, Schultz, instituted an online comment card in 2008, and he received 90,000 suggestions. And from those suggestions, it was abundantly clear that a loyalty program was wanted. You know, make me feel connected to my $4 or $5 macchiato, and provide some tech features, since we're all using our phones these days. So what he did was he put the loyalty program digital, made an app out of it. So they took cash out of the equation altogether, and instead you're able to pay with a barcode. Now that was a bit revolutionary when that came out. Today we just look at it as a given, as an obvious. But he wanted to find ways to engage the customer, make them feel loyal, and make the process easy. So in this particular case, it's actually having fewer touch points. I don't want to exchange money. I don't want to, have to go look online and see what to order. Just have everything a one-stop shop. When it comes to reusability, I hope people know this, but if you brought in a competitor cup to Starbucks or a reusable cup, about 10 years ago, I believe it was 10 cents off. Now I think during the holidays, it's 50 cents off your purchase of coffee. So there are ways that you can engage the loyal base, grow a base that can be loyal and be reusable. So Starbucks, as a multinational company, has found ways to bring in that circular economy, and I think they're doing very well at it.
Can you think of anything else they can do to go ahead and build up that sustainability?
Great question. I think they can say, similar to IKEA, by year X, we'll have 100% of our cups be recyclable, perhaps even compostable, if that is financially savvy. When you go to Starbucks, it's about purchasing a coffee and showing people that you have Starbucks, versus say Dunkin' Donuts. There's just this level of enjoyable superiority when you purchase Starbucks. So if you can say that not only am I purchasing a $5-6 cup of coffee, but I'm doing it environmentally in a kind way, I think that's something that they could, grow that loyal base by doing.
Yeah, I think they can start with using the coffee grounds for productive purposes as well. So maybe that's a message we can go ahead and put in the suggestion box back in Starbucks. So if anybody from Starbucks is watching, please go ahead and figure out a way. It works out great for growing mushrooms, I can tell you. I know that one personally.
And you can provide comments through their app as well. And I promise you they look at them every day.
Yeah? Okay.
Yep.
Ooh, that sounds good. Well, then you already gave me an action item, something that I need to go ahead and follow up on as soon as this live stream is over. Again, just go ahead and remind everybody that the subject is customer experience, and we're putting a focus on sustainability. I have Tony Amante Shepard with me today, and it would not be complete if we do not get some questions from the audience. So I welcome you I give you the opportunity, welcome the chance to read your comments with regards to what we're talking about, and perhaps you might have some questions yourself.
It looks like somebody named Mary posted something. A question.
Oh, I see. Yes. Okay. Yeah, Mary came up with a question. Recently, our gyms reopened in our area, and without any emails or contact to the gym goers at all, we were all charged. We were not given a chance to say whether we felt safe or even hear about the plans for coming back to the world. What would you have done differently in this situation?
Yeah, gymnasiums, they've taken the brunt of COVID. And so it sounds like she was charged without being asked, and she probably feels unsafe going to the gym and perhaps wanted to postpone even further the monthly charge, and maybe even just say no altogether and cancel the membership. So the business model behind Gymnasiums is quite interesting. It's all about quantity. You want to sign up as many people as possible, and while sure you hope as many people actually go to the gym, you don't want to have that wear and tear on the products and the workout material all that much. So it's actually to the gym's benefit at times to have not as many people go there, but still maintain those memberships. So in this case, having been charged without being asked and being uncomfortable going to the gym, I think a simple survey during COVID via email or even a text message from the gym to its X number of thousand members saying, tell us how you feel about coming back. If you had to have an appointment to make sure that we didn't have more than 5 or 10 people in the gym at one time, would you be okay with that? Engaging the customers in a simple survey would then allow the gym to say, okay, this is what we should do and this is what we will do. In this case, if she got charged without being asked, you need to refute that on your card. I would absolutely email the gym and say I was not engaged about this, asked any questions if I wanted to continue. So, certainly shame on the gym, but having that survey out early would have, I think, created a few steps along that customer journey point that the gym could have taken.
Yeah, and obviously when I hear a story like that, I have to question the empathy of the individuals who run that establishment, because they have to have a good idea of what the situation is for their actual customers. And when I hear a story like that, it makes me think that they are totally out of touch, and they probably deserve to fall by the wayside if they could go ahead and continue with those measures. But I'm not being too callous here. There was another question that came through I'd like to go ahead and include here. How can companies balance the contradictory forces affecting their customers, the desire to buy longer lasting, more environmentally friendly products versus lower incomes and unemployment now? Tony, any thoughts about that?
I have a few ideas, but I'm going to throw it to you, Mike, and ask you, living in Europe for about 30 years, what level of involvement does, state or even federal or entire EU play when it comes to kind of sharing these costs?
I think it's on a number of different levels. First of all, from the EU, this is they keep saying it's a hot topic. People are very jaded when it comes to the EU, but then I talk to various stakeholders that are dealing with Brussels, and I'm not just talking about people who are involved with policy, but people are actually running businesses. Mm-hmm. And I am continuously surprised of how committed they believe Brussels really is to all these things that we're talking about. So here we're talking about the right to repair, which is a big issue here in Europe. And of course, it did not fulfill everything that a lot of us wanted from it. But that being said, that was a clear move. The idea of banning single-use plastic, which is another one that's come out through Brussels recently. And the whole idea, and we keep hearing this idea of the Green New Deal coming out of the United States. Well, the big difference between EU and the United States, and this might get me some questions or some comments in the chat box, which would not be a bad thing. The big difference is that in the States, there's a lot of talk about it. And in the EU has decided in all this subsidies that are coming through right now that 30%, 30, is to be dedicated towards sustainable solutions, and not necessarily only referring to climate change. Climate change is a symptom. It's not really the problem. We're talking about the problem here. So one, that is part of the model, but let me go more into detail with regards to the question. So buying long lasting, that means that we're changing the economical model. We're not talking about quick turnover. And let me go ahead and tell you something. Even if we keep being called this, We are not customers. We are people. We are human beings. And the fact is that we have to stop reacting as if we are fulfilling this role that others expectantly want from us. And if I don't get any comments from the chat box for this one, I really don't know what's coming here. And so the fact is that we have to understand, I believe, based on the subject here, Tony, this is really the crux of it. If we're talking about a customer experience, then this is part of my experience, and this is something that I want to hold on to. And so I really only want to concentrate and dealing with these companies that are actually fulfilling this. So let's go to the second part of this question. I really love this question. More environmentally friendly products. And of course, one of the problems we have, especially tied to COVID, is that the disparity between rich and poor is like totally gone through the roof, because we have a whole group of people in the society who actually, and unfortunately, you ended up on the short end of the stick in certain respects, Tony, I know, but we have a situation where a number of us have been working from home anyways, and the thing is, we don't have anything to buy anymore. We're happy not buying anything, and so that means we even have more money in the bank. And the people who really suffered, and we mentioned a number of times that the hospitality industry, they had no choice, and that's a serious problem. So now if we go ahead and talk about sustainability, and then we focus on sustainability, the question really is now, how do we bring these two elements together? And I'm almost afraid now we're going into the crux of circular economy. And within the circular economy, we're trying to avoid producing goods that nobody wants, and we call that growth. And when we talk about lower incomes and unemployment now, what's the real issue? The people don't have their needs being taken care of. And so what should be our priority? Mm-hmm. Does that mean, and I think that really gets to the crux of what our subject is here, do we have to make a choice between sustainability and making sure that we have an equitable situation moving forward? I tend to think that this is almost like a smokescreen, because there are solutions, and I know some of the individuals in the United States might not necessarily like some of these comments, but there's this concept called a UBI, Universal Basic Income. And if we see what's going on in Spain has actually gone ahead and decided to take on the UBI. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that was very brave of them, especially considering that the economic situation. That being said, if we think about the money that's being paid by the governments to go ahead and subsidize keeping people out of unemployment, for me, that's almost UBI. How do we go ahead and make sure that moving forward, and this isn't going to be accomplished in one day to the next, how do we ensure that we accomplish reaching those big problems we have out there? And climate change clearly falls within that category, and making sure that it's not at the cost of somebody else. And I think that's the crux of this question. I think the crux of the question.
There's the day is not complete until I mention something related to jazz, because I love jazz. And Tony Bennett has a somewhat famous quote, which I'm chopping up here, but he said, always buy something of high quality. You don't need to be constantly rebuying a new one. So, purchasing things from China that are not, super well made, getting a cup from a McDonald's and throwing your paper bag out. I mean, what if, back to the caller's question, how do you assist those with no to little income and the less fortunate? Sure, universal basic income is a political topic. Maybe politics aside, if someone with limited means finds a way of saving money, and we are able to then somewhat subsidize a purchase for them that is of higher quality, which would then be longer lasting, I think that's an approach. I think then the customer experience aspect would be more favorable to the business as well. For example, when people were going to work and if you were bringing your lunch, are you putting it in Tupperware and bringing it back and washing it and reusing it? Or is it all in styrofoam? Are you going out to the local vending shop and purchasing plasticware and then having to throw that out? Purchasing things that are longer lasting is more expensive, but I would guarantee you less expensive in the long run because you're not having to throw it out. But really good question. I think this is one that everyone's been grappling with. Unfortunately, those that need that assistance the most probably have the most quietest of voice these days.
Yeah, and we have, I think for the most part, we have it pretty good here in the global north, because if we look at the effect that COVID-19 has had on the global south and basically eliminating a lot of the progress that we had from the Millennium Goals, then I think for the most part, we don't have much to complain about. But that's to be safe for another show. Our concentration here today is on the circular experience and concentrating on sustainability. And I believe that you have one more example, if I got it right, Tony?
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Yeah, so I wanted an example that was non-tangible. So we had the Patagonia products and we had the Starbucks example, but this one's not tangible. This is information. And if anyone's familiar with IBM, they're very much behind the scenes. They don't make computers as much as they do provide consulting work these days. And so IBM created this software out of COVID called Watson Works. And they just announced this a few weeks ago. It's an interesting software for businesses, usually enterprise ones, say like a Starbucks. And it is a way for when returning to the office is safe. Is it? Is it safe? And so this Watson Works is an app that says, what is the COVID infection count in your office's area? What have you touched or been around in the office? Should you be going to the office? How many people were you in touch with personally and physically over the weekend? And so Watson Works is this tool, this app for larger enterprises that provides data-driven insights that helps the employers make informed decisions on the workplace reentry, on facility management, space allocation, other COVID-related priorities. It's quite fascinating to have a company create a software that is, for the foreseeable future, going to be utilized every day. So I tip my hat to IBM for creating this, and it is the customer journey aspect that this app, I believe, will assist in keeping people very healthy and safer than others that are not using this app. So good for IBM.
Yeah, we've been having a number of conversations here in Europe with regards to the apps, because it's been more or less left up to the to the countries to come up with something. And of course, then Google and Apple have been involved in those conversations. And so there's a lot of movement taking place there.
Sure.
And yeah, if we're talking about sustainability, obviously the whole idea of physical distancing clearly comes into play.
I have a question,
sure.
Not necessarily for you, but just in general. What about re-socialization? I have friends that have not had human interaction, human contact in 4 or 5 months, other than the people living in their home. Everything is delivered to them, and they're taking this extremely seriously. So, if and when a vaccine comes out, when we are having to go back to the office, are we able to communicate, or are we, going back to the Stone Age of, me, Tony, you, Susie? How do we interact at a human level? I think there's going to be some psychological needs to be addressed to make sure that we can do so in a healthy way.
Oh, for sure. And I tend to think that on the one hand, what I've observed here in Austria, that you either have the group that are said, oh, they use the phrase post-COVID, or the others that are actually very concerned. And if we look at the statistics, these are stats that I heard today, that the count in Germany has gone up big time. And there was a big protest in Berlin because people feel that the government is taking away their freedom. And I'm sure for you, Tony, that might sound very, very familiar because that's been going on in the States for a couple months. And I think to close the loop with regards to this whole idea of businesses and sustainability and dealing with all these subjects. So how do businesses actually go ahead and relate to their customers once this is actually stabilized, whatever that stability might be? And I understand from the example that you gave from IBM and as a tool that it will help bring more stability and ensure that we have a better situation so that there's less chance of affliction, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that's going to be a big question for companies, how they go ahead and deal with their customers moving forward. And how do we go ahead and make sure that this is considered to be normal? In getting back to your point, I think the real question is going to be, what do we consider to be normal? But I'm almost afraid we could do a whole show on that one.
Next week.
But it's very, very important. And I think that, and this was a motivation for me in having a show on this program, because one of the comments that I heard or a number of times, as soon as we hit the lockdown, was that we have no money for sustainability and we cannot afford to concentrate it because we have bigger problems to solve. Now, I am not trying to belittle the seriousness of COVID-19. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that for you guys. But the point is that these other problems don't go away. And my personal take, and again, I might get some comments, and it'd be good. Maybe I should be a little bit more provocative and get some comments in the chat box. But my personal take is, because of the way that we have managed things vis-a-vis nature, is one of the reasons why this problem actually came up to begin with. And it's all tied to our relationship to nature. And so for me, that just if we solve the problem of COVID-19 means that we've solved one problem, but we have not solved the problem. And part of it is tied to this whole idea of consumption. And I still like to go ahead and go back to that question that we had earlier, because I think that the businesses are going to have to think about, how do they remain profitable in selling less goods? That's really the crux of the question. And so the real question is here: how do we manage this in a digital framework where we give things away for free?
Right.
That means that we need to come up with new business models, and I think that's the key. That's the key here of what we're talking about. We're talking about new business models that are required, so that we can ensure that that sustainability is actually reached, and that we're able to go ahead and make sure that experience is really what those customers are looking for. Not only those ones that can afford it, but rather that is something that all people can go ahead and participate in. And that means, to a certain degree, and I'm just kind of piggybacking on some of the things that you talked about tied to empowerment and transparency, then that means that our relations, possibly within the corporation, we see a lot of this taking place now, but also the relationship that we have to our customers. And I personally believe there's a clear correlation between this whole idea of customer experience, focusing on the experience, and ensuring that you make it much more of an experience. So that could very well be that you do not make your money exclusively by going ahead and selling the product, but you include the entire experience tied to the product per se, which is something that we very much find within the realm of digitalization. And so I think that part of it, I think you have one more example for us, if I'm not mistaken. The idea here would be to ensure that we are showing our customers daily that we mean it, and we go ahead and bring them into the process and help them to help you. And I think the last part is really making sure that you come up with new business models that allow you to go ahead and focus on both sustainability and profitability. But let me go ahead and give you an opportunity for the last slide, if I may.
Before you flip to that one,
Sure.
For about 7 or 8 years, I worked in international higher education, and some of my clients today are universities and colleges across the United States.
Hmm.
They have filled, I would say, not just the student body, but the administrations, the staff, the community where these colleges and universities are at, because they have had months to plan to go remote after they did go remote in the springtime. And I would say, I did some research, about 2/3 of the universities said we're going to have some form of online learning and in-person learning in the fall. And they announced this in June and early July. Now it's August 1st, 2020 today. And a lot of those universities are retracting that statement, saying we're doing all online. COVID numbers have gone up in colleges and universities. Frat houses, which didn't see their tenants leave in the summer, were having parties and they got infected. And so a lot of these universities are backtracking. How do you make that experience, which in itself has always been in person for the most part? You're paying $60,000, $70,000 to attend Georgetown University's MBA program, and suddenly you have to do it online, and you have to pay the same price. That's not fair to the student, but it's also not fair to the university for saying, hey, you need to charge the students less. At times, it's almost more expensive to do online learning initially to set it up. So how can universities, in this example of being transparent, in having a good customer experience, do well? I think looking back, hindsight's 2020, universities again should have done some surveying, asking if students are comfortable meeting in person, comfortable doing a hybrid model. Talk with businesses that are dependent upon the student population, asking them questions such as, if student numbers are down, are you still able to survive? Because in a couple of years, if businesses are out at a student town, I doubt students actually would want to go to that university. So universities are grappling with a very, very difficult problem. It's going to be a very expensive problem over the next few years. I'm very keen to see what universities are still going to be around. I have a theory that small, extremely liberal arts schools, as well as for-profit institutions that have popped up in the past 20, 30 years, will be consumed by larger state institutions in the next few years. It's a very difficult time right now for universities, and I wish them luck. And when I communicate with them and advise them, it's me saying to them, create some surveys, look at the return of investment that you're going to get if you engage the community, engage the students, engage the faculty, and show that the value of education is not going to be diminished if you do online. That's what I tell them.
Yeah. I tend to think that this was a problem that had been built up over a number of years, specifically tied to higher education. And in COVID-19 has just more or less put it into overdrive. And I think that we will have a number of remnants. And if we're talking about an experience, then, and I can vouch for this also here in Europe, that the student experience is something that is very often neglected, and I think that it's important to take advantage of the opportunity to come up with something much more meaningful for all parties concerned, that being the students, those being the professors, and in the role that the university plays within our society.
Sure. If you go to the last slide, we can relate this model I've come up with to a question that somebody posed in another chat during this talk. Question is, what do transportation authorities do to increase ridership once people come back to work? Will people feel safe heading to the office during rush hour in New York City, for example? Here in Washington, D.C., a statistic came out by the Metro ridership. They're losing $2 million every day. I haven't been on a DC Metro since March 7, and I've been on a public bus twice. And we enter the public bus only by the back door now, and it's free because there should be no interaction with the bus driver, who now has a plastic front. So the question is, what do transportation authorities do to increase ridership once people come back to work? If you apply this Hart's model that I've come up with and use in my consulting, I think there's a way to solve that problem. Holistic customer experience and employee experience mapping. Are let's talk about the employees first, who are driving the metros in New York City, for example. Are they feeling comfortable communicating with riders in person? How often are they having to communicate with them? Are the swipe turnstiles going to be wiped down? Is there some sort of Febreze/Lysol spray that can be sprayed in and around where the employees are having to interact? Make sure that they're comfortable. Perhaps even give them the quote-unquote hazard pay to show that they are essential workers. And look at what the customer experience is. This is a great time to make every rider on the metro in New York or EDC or any city, Chicago, LA, go ticketless and cashless. Make sure that they're able to use their phone. And if you don't have a phone, have a disposable, perhaps compostable card that they can use. Look at the measurements. So the E is evaluate measurements. How many people are using the metro right now? What was the ridership level pre-COVID? Is there a way to, for example, have fewer cars in operation because ridership is down right now? That could help save some money. But look at the measurements that you're using to ensure that when you do come back full steam ahead, if and when there's a vaccine, for example, that we're following the right numbers to show that there's been growth. Arrive at the conclusions. The A in hard is arrive at the conclusions. Make sure that you're unearthing perhaps disconnects across all departments. In this case, it would be the riders, it would be the employees, it would be the city officials where the metro is. Make sure that you're really making these connections. And then we look at R. So look at the touch points along the customer journey. Like I said, perhaps you can go all digital. Is there a way to have fewer touch points but more meaningful ones? There are TVs in the metros, at least here in the DC area. What are we showing on those TVs in the metro? Is there a way to make me as a rider feel safer and more comfortable? So instead of having ads, let's talk about health and show what the metro company is doing to ensure cleanliness. Teach and implement these changes. So there'll be changes to ensure that ridership is going up, and those changes could be health changes. Those could be, again, with the remote app. But teach the employees that are working at the metro how to incorporate this change management. And then S is just to seek the truth. Make sure that you're reevaluating the touch points with the employees, with the customers, reevaluate the journeys after a few weeks of changes, and make sure that they're the correct, that the changes that you've implemented are correct. So always going back and reevaluating. And I've applied this heart model to a few of my clients, and it's digestible. And it is holistic because we are looking not just at the customer's journey, but the employees and all stakeholders. So that's probably what I would do if I were New York Metro. Make sure that you're going out of your way to show the steps you're taking to be clean. Perhaps you can give some level of discount to lure people back in for purchasing maybe a week long pass or a month-long pass versus just individual ones. That could shore up some cash faster. There are many ways, but I would definitely apply the heart model in this case.
Okay, well then, Tony, thank you very much for that. It makes a lot of sense. And I think with that, we are coming to a close. Sorry, let me go ahead and bring this one back. Coming to a close. Thank you very much for all of you who had joined us today. And thank you very much, of course, Tony, for joining. And enjoy the interaction today, and look forward to our next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.